From the White House in the office of the President of the United States, we present an address by Dwight D. Eisenhower. This is the farewell address for President Eisenhower, whose 8 years as chief executive come to an end at noon Friday.
Good evening, my fellow Americans. We now stand 10 years past the midpoint of a century that has witnessed 4 major wars among great nations. 3 of these involved our own country. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications.
What are we fighting for? Why do we bury our sons and brothers in lonely graves far from home? Our men are dying to preserve a way of life. These privileges, these rights, they're precious enough to fight for, precious enough to die for.
States is the greatest force for good in the world, and we have not an obligation to go out and fight and start wars, but to certainly do everything we can to spread democracy and freedom throughout the world.
We shall pay any price, bear any burden to assure the survival and the success of liberty.
What are we fighting for? Freedom? Freedom.
I think we fight because it's necessary and because it's right.
We're not talking simply about the price of gas. We are talking about the price of liberty.
We seek neither territory nor bases. We fight for the principle of self-determination.
America's strength and, yes, her military power have been a force for peace, not conquest.
By keeping our military strong, by using force where we must, America is making a difference for people here and around the world.
Our cause is just, and no matter how long it takes, we will defeat the enemies of freedom.
I was on my way into work, and I was taking the subway, which is elevated subway. And as the subway heads to New York, there comes a point where it makes a very abrupt left-hand turn, almost a 90-degree turn. And when it does that, the wheels of the subway always screech loudly. If you look out the window, that's when you can see the World Trade Center. I was sitting on the subway reading, as I always do. Train made the left-hand turn. The wheels screeched. Everybody in the car jumped up and started to gasp. Oh! And I look up, and there's the building with smoke pouring out of it. I didn't know if that was my son's building because Tower 1 and Tower 2 were in perfect symmetry. And I didn't know which tower I'm looking at. And I'm just thinking to myself, how did my son get out of there? Well, I don't know how, but he got out of there. There's no two ways about that. He can't be in there because anybody who's in there is going to die.
Blowback. It's a CIA term. Blowback does not mean simply the unintended consequences of foreign operations. It means the unintended consequences of foreign operations that were deliberately kept secret from the American public, so that when the retaliation comes, the American public is not able to put it in context, to put cause and effect together. that they come up with questions like, why do they hate us?
The forces of evil declared war on the American
Not since Pearl Harbor has there been so much national
freedom and democracy are under attack.
Why do they hate us? That's the question everybody's asking.
Our government did not want the forensic question asked, what were their motives? And instead chose to say they were just evildoers.
And the towers keep falling. Every 5 minutes, there go the tower again. I got on the phone, I called NBC. I'm listening to your newscast. How many times are you going to show those goddamn towers coming down? Don't you have any respect for the people who have family and friends in those towers? Do we have to keep watching them fall down? I've watched them fall down 50 times already. When are you going to stop? Please stop. You're ripping my heart out.
But to win a war against people that hate freedom.
God gave me two of the greatest sons any parent could ever ask for. Why he took one back, I'll never know.
I can hear you, the rest of the world hears you, and the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
Somebody had to pay for this. Somebody had to pay for 9/11. I want enemy dead. I want to see their bodies stacked up for what they did, for taking my son.
There was a moment when the entire world was behind us. There was 1 million people demonstrating in the streets of Tehran in favor of the United States. We had the world behind us. Now kids are dying. Billions are being spent every month. Animosity against the United States is stronger now than it ever has been in history. What happened here? Is it just the experience of September 11th? Or is there something else going on here? When something like this happens, you've got to take stock of this. You've got to understand what went wrong here.
We live here in the United States of amnesia. No one remembers anything before Monday morning. Everything is a blank. We have no history.
Guatemala, 1954. The United States intervened unilaterally to protect its vital interests. Lebanon, 1958. The United States feels its policy of containment in the Middle East is threatened. Responds openly and unilaterally. The United States intervened in Laos, the Congo, Brazil.
There are so many theories about what happened in Iraq and why we really went in, but when you look at the history of the United States, almost every president, there is something we don't like somewhere in the world, and we've got to dispense military force.
Ronald Reagan invaded Grenada in 1983.
Last night I ordered U.S. military forces to Panama.
This is not about one president or one party. We fight as a nation because we perceive it is in our interest to fight. And we then mention words like freedom and nice common values that who can be against freedom, when in fact much more has been going on privately.
Just completed a meeting with our national security team, and we've received the latest intelligence updates. The deliberate and deadly attacks which were carried out yesterday against our country were more than acts of terror. They were acts of war.
September 11th, 2001, provided a group of people deeply committed to the expansion of the American empire the opportunity to implement plans that they had been laying since 1992. At that time, a young Paul Wolfowitz was working in a subordinate position under Dick Cheney, who was then Secretary of Defense in the Pentagon. With the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, Cheney orders Wolfowitz to write